Hello wonderful people! Today I'm going to show you how to transform your photos from this to this. And all you need to follow along this video is your favorite digital art software. I will be working with Procreate, but I'm going to give you tips for other software as well. You're also going to need a super basic round brush and maybe another kind of drawing brush that you like, but that is totally optional, and I'm also going to give you tips on finding that when we're at this stage in the video. Oh, and there is going to be a giveaway in this video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Great, so the first thing we're going to do here is finding a picture that you can work with. And that is really basic, but I do have a few pointers for you. Make sure that it's either a picture that you own or a picture that is copyright free. So you don't want to just go on Google and grab a picture from there because it might belong to someone else. Actually, the chances are it belongs to someone else. And in that case, you would be essentially stealing the picture, and we definitely do not want that. So for safety, I always recommend you go with a picture that is your own. In this case here, this is not my picture, but it's a picture from a copyright-free image bank, and I will link this image in the description below. I chose that one because I know sometimes people like to follow along exactly with what I'm doing, so I want to have a picture that you can download as well. But otherwise, just find a picture that you like of you or your friend, whatever, then import it in your software and just set it as your background. And what I mean by that is pretty simple. You're just going to open up your layers and you are going to rename this picture to either original or background, whatever you want. And then you're going to lock it to make sure that you don't draw on the picture itself. So in Procreate, the way to lock a layer is super easy. You just swipe it towards the left with one finger and you select lock right here. In a lot of other software, it's literally just a little lock icon that you can tap on, and then that locks your layer. So feel free to pause the video here, get your picture in your file. If you're not exactly sure how to do that, I'm going to write a few tips in the video description as well. And then once you're ready, we're going to move on to the next chapter, which is actually starting to draw the outlines. Great, so once you have your picture, we're going to start by just mapping out the outlines around the clothing element or whatever element you want to turn into more of a cartoon style. So for that, we're just going to create a new layer above the background, of course, and we're going to rename this new layer to outlines. And for the outlines here, I recommend you just go ahead and pick black because we want this super cartoonish, comic book style. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm just going to pick pure black. But the brush you use is totally up to you. It could be just a basic round brush that works super, super well. And when I say basic round brush, all I mean is, for example, in Procreate, there's an airbrushing pack that comes with it. And it's just a round brush that doesn't have any texture or any feathering on the edges. So a hard brush, a round brush, something like that could work totally well. Now, if you have a drawing brush that you know you like, whether it is a pencil brush or an inking brush, those could work really, really well too. So if you're working with Procreate, you could experiment with a brush from the inking pack that comes with the app, such as the Studio Pen or the Dry Ink if you want a little bit of texture. Or you could work with brushes from creators. For example, I will be working with a brush here from my inking, stippling, and texture bundle. These brushes are not essential at all. That being said, if you do want to check them out, they will be linked in the description below, and there's always a special promo code. But again, not essential at all. I just want to mention them. So it would be in the inking pack that comes with that bundle, the ultra smooth tracing. And with that, we're literally just going to go around and figure out what shape we want that clothing element or that element, whatever it is actually, to look like. So you could follow the lines of the photo, or you could just create your own lines. I'm going to do a mix of both. I'm going to have the shirt be the same shape, but I'm going to have it kind of drip at the bottom. I'm going to stop talking in a second to let you focus on drawing your outlines, but before that, I do have a few tips on how you can get the best looking outlines possible. And the first tip is really simple, but it makes a huge difference. It's to change the thickness of your outlines depending on what you're drawing. And so what I mean by that is you're going to start by just figuring out the first thickness, so just the thickest outlines you want to have. Again, that's a question of personal preference, depends on the picture you're working on, so it's not a one-size-fits-all. I'm going to go with this, why not? And with that thickest size, you're going to draw all the elements, or you're going to outline all the elements that are essentially the edges of main elements. So for example, if I was to focus on this section of the body here, that would mean outlining this edge of the arm and then the intersection, but not the folds or any kind of fabric details like this. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick, and I'm going to come back in just a second to show you what I would count as thick outlines for this top right here. Okay, so as you can see, essentially it's really the most basic outlines that if I was to hide the picture underneath, you could still tell, okay, this is a shirt. Weird one, but you get the idea. So feel free to pause the video here, take all the time you need to draw these thick outlines, and once you're done with that, we're going to move on to drawing medium outlines. So medium outlines is everything that would still be pretty important, like folds, maybe these little drawstrings, stuff like that, but are not essential for the shape to be understood. So they would be, yes, fold, the drawstrings, but they would not be little like seams and little fabric details like these. These would be extra thin. So essentially here you're going to make your brush a little bit smaller. Again, just testing it out before you start. And once more, I'm going to go ahead, draw those medium outlines first, then get back to you and show you what it would look like in the case of this piece. So as you can see, all the other important elements that were not outlines and all the big folds are now outlined with slightly smaller strokes. And if I was to hide the original picture, you're going to see, because these strokes are a little bit thinner, or these outlines are a little bit thinner, it makes the piece just easier for the eye to read. It's not as bulky, it's not as crammed full of very thick details that are hard to distinguish from the actual important outlines. Now, one thing to note that I totally forgot to mention when I drew the main outlines is that yes, you can change the shape of the elements, and I encourage you to do that, but you want to make sure that these outlines are at least the same size, if not larger than the main element, because otherwise when we come back in and add the colors, if you can still see, for example, the shirt poking out outside, the illusion won't be there at all. It's just going to look very, very strange. So for example, here I have this kind of weird bit of fabric, I think it's from a sewing line or something like that, that is poking out. So I'm going to see that in the end, and that's just going to look weird. So I'm actually going to come back in with my outline and just draw over that really quickly. Same thing here, making sure my shirt doesn't poke out at all. Now with that said, the last type of outline I would recommend drawing is very thin outlines for super precise details. Like again, this kind of sewing line here, these fabric details, and other kind of textures like that. We want to have them because they do give nice character to the piece, but we don't want them to distract from the other outlines, because otherwise the piece is going to get super busy. So once more, it's just a case of testing your size, making it a little bit smaller, and then coming in and drawing those details as you want. And you can totally at this stage add extra details. If you don't have any stitching lines or stuff like that, you can add some. That can add a lot of character, and that can just bring your piece to the next level. So if I go ahead and hide the original picture, now we can see we have these details and they blend really well with the whole piece. They just look very easy to read, and they're just, they're contributing to the piece instead of just making it feel too intense. So once more, feel free to pause the video, take all the time you need to finish drawing those base outlines. And once you're done, I have one more outline tip for you before we move on to changing the shape, if that's something you want to do. Great, so the last outline tip I have for you is very, very simple. It's a little bit more if you're a perfectionist, I would say, but I really think it helps the eye flow through the piece. And that tip is to refine the connection point between different outlines. So for example, here I have this outline and then this one that is kind of butting into it. And you can refine those outlines by just thickening the point where one outline butts into another one. So for example, instead of just having this uniform line here, I would come back in and just thicken this section right here. So same thing here, I could thicken that. Really, whenever there are outlines that are butting into each other, just thickening that intersection point. It really doesn't need to be perfect in any way, but it makes the piece really so much more easier to read for the eye, although it's not necessarily something you would be able to say, oh, this kind of outline, has been refined this way. When it is done, it makes a big difference in the end result. Great. So while you're working on this, let's talk a little bit about the giveaway. So the prize for this giveaway is going to be my illustration course, Illustration from Scratch, in which I teach you really everything you need to know to start drawing your own illustrations. So we're talking about drawing faces, characters, we're talking about perspective, picking colors, how to use different lighting scenarios, how to start drawing from scratch if you've never done that. We're going to talk about sketching, tips on how to improve, tips on how to find your style, and a whole lot of things. So it's really a comprehensive course that you can take if you're a beginner or intermediate and want to start drawing your own pieces without having to follow step-by-step tutorials. And I'm going to make 2 winners in this video. And the way to enter this giveaway is really easy. All you have to do is leave me a comment both on this video as well as on Instagram, letting me know which accents element I end up drawing around my character towards the end of the video. Now again, all the details are going to be in the video description. Make sure you check them out before you enter. But I do want to say it out loud here in the video. I do not have Telegram, Nicegram, or anything like that. And I will not ask you to contact me at any point. So if you get a comment from someone saying something like, "Congratulations, you won, message me to this number," it is not me, it is a bot, they're spam. It's been so annoying in the last few giveaways, so I just really wanted to mention it in the video itself. What you can do in that case is just report a comment, and I do my best to come and delete it as I see it, but they just keep popping up, they're insane. But anyway, that's enough of a rant for today. Awesome! So once you're happy with your basic outlines, it's super easy to come back in and add some extra details and make the piece feel more cartoonish. So one way I'm going to personally do that in this piece is just, again, like I mentioned in the intro, making the bottom of this crop top melt, essentially. So what I'm going to do for that, I'm just going to keep the same brush, making sure it's similar to my bigger outlines. Doesn't need to be the exact same, but it needs to be roughly in the same range. And I'm just going to come back in and look around and see where the fabric is drooping, for example, here. I'm just going to come in and draw these kind of melty shapes. If you are enjoying this tutorial so far, please consider helping the channel by giving this video a like and subscribing if you haven't already. Now, I know everyone on YouTube is asking you to do that, but believe it or not, it does help us and our channels a lot because it just tells YouTube to take the video and show it to more people. So thanks for helping. Then once you have the shapes mapped out, you just come back in with an eraser, and then you just erase the original outlines. Great! So once you have your outlines, it's super easy. It's just like you're working with a coloring book. The hardest thing is really just going to be to pick whichever color you want to use. So it could be the original color. In that case, you could just color drop your color and then go with that. Or you could experiment with a completely different color, especially here. In my case, I feel like she's really monochromatic with the bottom and the top being the same, which looks great. But for the cartoon, I want something that pops more. And so you can just really pick roughly something you think could work, or honestly, whatever at this stage. Do the next couple steps, and once you're done mapping out the base colors, I'm going to show you how you could adjust that color until you're super happy with it. So for example, I think here I want to go with a magenta kind of color, so I'm going to really quickly pick something along those lines. Really super quick, as you can see. And then we're going to create a new layer, put it under the outlines, of course, but still above the basic picture. And we're going to rename that new layer to Colors. Now you could obviously stick with the same brush you were using, but here I prefer going with just a super basic round brush. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, if you're working with Procreate, that could mean going in the airbrushing pack that comes with the app and picking the hard brush. Really, any circle brush that doesn't have texture is your ticket to success here. If you do have my inking, stippling, and texture bundle in the inking pack, I'm personally going to pick the base round brush. And all we're going to do here is we're going to outline the outside edge of our shape, not going into any details at all, so that we can later fill it in and have a complete solid silhouette. So I'm going to stop talking here to let you focus on drawing these very basic outlines. And once we're done with that, I'm going to show you essentially how you can play with that color until you're super happy with it. So once you have a full outline without any gaps, you can just go ahead and drop your color onto it to recolor everything. Now, I actually think I'm pretty happy with the color, so I might just go with that. But if you were not happy with your color, super easy to change it because it is on a separate layer. You could either just change the color by going through your color selector and then dropping a new one onto your shape. That could totally work. Or you could play with any kind of color filter you have in your software. So something like curves, color balance, or my favorite, hue, saturation, and brightness. Now, if you're working in Procreate, those filters are in the adjustment panel here at the top, in this top section here. And you can see the first one is actually hue, saturation, and brightness. I'm going to show you how that behaves really quickly. Essentially, once you open a color filter, you should get some sliders that you can play around with, and those are going to change the color. So let's say here I'm not sure I want pink. I could just play with the hue and see if there's a color that I like more than pink. I think I was pretty happy again with my pink. I might make it a little bit more red than what it was. Now maybe I think this pink is not pink enough. I want it to be a little bit more vibrant. So in that case, I could just play with the saturation to make it pop a lot, or make it more towards gray. In my case, I want it to be almost bubblegum pink, so I'm going to make it super saturated. And then the last slider we have here is the brightness. So do we want a dark color or a light color? I'm going to go with something quite bright. Now at this stage, we have the basic shape for our cartoon element, but it's super flat compared to the rest. Now we don't necessarily want to have realistic shading because that would look kind of weird, but we do want to have some shadings so it doesn't just look like a weird sticker that we pasted on top of the picture. Now you could obviously just go ahead and color pick whatever color you use for that element, manually make it darker, and then you could come in and just paint your shadows that way. That could totally work, of course, but if you want to be a little bit more accurate with how your shadows and lights would behave, you would have to look at how the other shadows in the piece are behaving. And by that, I mean not just the position, but also the tint of the shadows. Because shadows are not just grays and black. They have a bit of an ambiance depending on what the light source is and what is casting the shadows and stuff like that. Now, if you're used to working with colors, or if your eyes are trained for that, you could be able to tell, like for example, in this piece, my shadows are pretty cold. So you could just know right out of the gate that you would go with colder shadows. If you do not know how to see that, and that's totally normal, that requires some eye training, there is a way to just analyze the picture very easily and find that answer. And the way to do that is just color picking. For example, here I know I have this kind of sunny area, and then right next to it I have the very dark shadow. So what I could do is color pick from the light area, open my color palette, or my color selector I should say, and I'm going to keep an eye on the hue, so the color. In this case it's a nice yellow. But if I go ahead and pick the shadow, let's see what would happen. The shadow is obviously darker, but it's also moved the hue a little bit more towards green than yellow. It's very subtle, but it's a little bit there. And that tells me that yes, my shadows, because they move towards blue instead of red, they are colder. Now, if that is getting way above your head, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and use the first technique that I showed you, which was color picking color, making it darker. That totally works. But otherwise, when you do have that information, what you can do is do the same little movement with the original color that you pick. So for example, here, if I was to go with my pink, I would make it a little bit colder. So I would move it towards the blue. In this case, it's towards the left. So just a tiny little bit. Now, one other tip that could be super helpful is actually to hide the color layer and to create a new layer just for your shadows so you can see where the shadows are on the original picture. So yeah, just a new layer still below your outlines but above your colors, and renaming that new layer to shadows. Otherwise, with the same kind of base round brush that you are using to draw the basic color shape, you can just go over and figure out where the main shadows are. We really don't want to get into too many details with these shadows. We just want to find the most important ones. And we also don't want to necessarily have them be soft shadows. We want to have that hard edge that is going to look cartoonish. Now, these shadows are definitely going to depend on the piece you're drawing. So I am going to keep my video going in the background just so you can get an idea of how much shadows I personally will draw and the types of shadow I choose to draw. But obviously, in your case, they will be based on the picture you decided to use. Now, once you do have your shadows, make sure you reactivate your colors just to check that everything is okay, and potentially also to change the color of your shadows using the same technique as we used before. So in my case, I feel like they're a little bit too pale, so I'm just going to use my color selector here, make it a little bit lighter, make it a little bit darker, and then I'm just going to recolor my shadows with that darker color. Now you could stop here, or you could add some extra highlights. Now highlights are something that are very personal to your style. You could use the same technique as we use for the shadows, meaning you could just hide your color layer, create a new layer for the lights, and just base them on whatever highlights you see. I like to go with something a little bit more my style, which is outlining my outlines with light. So I'm going to show you how to do that in a second, but first I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to reactivate my base color layer. And I'm going to create a new layer below my outlines, but above everything else that I have so far. And I'm going to rename that new layer to Lights. And here, because this is something super cartoonish, I'm actually going to go with just pure white outlines. Let's keep it simple. And I'm going to keep my same hard brush, but I'm going to make it quite a bit smaller. And what I mean by outlining my outlines, it's a technique that I use in pretty much every single illustration that I do, for which I want to have my own signature style, because again, it's just such a big part of my style at this point. And it's so easy to do, so I'm going to show you how to do it. The idea is to figure out where the light source is, and there's two ways to do that. Either you see the light source. In my case, I can kind of see that it's right here, and I can also see the highlights are on the left side of the elements, so that's pretty easy. Or you can see some intense shadows. So in my case, the shadows I can see they're on the right, meaning the light source would be on the opposite side, the left. And so when you find that information, all you're going to do is you're going to look at all the outlines you have, mostly the thick, big main outlines, and you're going to come around them and you're going to outline them whenever they are facing the light source. So in my case, again, the light source was kind of lower left right here. So if I look at the arm, that's a thick outline. I'm going to come around and add some highlights on that section whenever it's facing the light source. So really, as you can see, it is super simple. It takes just a few seconds, but it can really transform the piece. So I'm going to keep going. Once more, I'm going to have my video going in the background if you want to use it as a reference, but it is, again, just like the shadow, something you need to customize based on the picture you are using. And to make it extra cartoonish, you can also add some extra shine in these outlines, or these highlights, I should say, especially if, like me, you have something that is melty or something that looks more like plastic. And those are also super easy. Essentially, you're going to find the thickest, kind of roundest areas. In my case, the arm here would be a big thick area or a big round area. And close to where you added the highlight, you're going to have these extra shiny lines. So I usually like to draw kind of a dot and then a thicker line or a longer line. I can't speak anymore. Sorry, guys. Now you definitely don't want to overdo these ones, but adding maybe 3 or 5, something like that, can really be a good way to amp up your piece. And the last thing we can do to really bring the piece together, because right now it looks pretty cool to have that cartoonish shirt, but it just also looks a little bit weird because it's the only cartoonish element we have, is adding some accents in the background. So to do that, you would just create a new layer below everything you have. And you could either rename that new layer to accents or details, depending on what you want to do. So I'm going to rename mine to accents. And I like to keep those white, but you could really go with whatever color. I'm going to go with white. And here you could either use the base round brush or the drawing brush you are using. That's totally up to you. And that also depends on the elements you want to draw. So I'm going to give you a few examples here. Let's say, the sky is pretty boring here. It's kind of empty compared to the textured ground. So I could just come in here with my base round brush and quickly add some very cartoonish clouds. Whoa. I'm doing this really quickly here just to show you an example. Obviously, you would take the time to make sure they actually look good in your piece. But something like that. In a similar vein, you could go ahead and maybe draw, flowers, which doesn't make sense because this is concrete, but if you were on grass, flowers, you could have birds, really whatever you want. You could have writing, or if you're not exactly sure, you could just have basic movement lines. So for those, I actually like going back to the outlines brush that we use because it's a little bit more fluid. So I'm going to go ahead and do exactly that. And kind of looking at the motion of the body. In my case here, she's popping the hip there and then kind of popping her shoulders on this side. So here I would really just come in, figuring out the size of my brush first, of course. But then all I would do is I would accentuate the movement of the hips by drawing, 2 or 3 very simple lines. Then same thing with the shoulders. Actually, I like them really thick, so I'm going to come back in and thicken the hips ones as well. Maybe adding one on this side because of the pocket. I know the pocket is not, top of the body, but in general, for composition, I think it's always good when you have an element to have it in an odd number, so 1, 3, 5, 7, and so forth. 2 just kind of looks a little bit weird, so I'm going to ground the piece by adding an extra one or an extra group of these lines around the pocket. And there you go. Now, if you want to learn how to draw your own cartoon characters, I highly recommend you check out this playlist because I have a bunch of tutorials for you. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I post every Saturday with sometimes bonus videos on Tuesdays as well. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.